Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to World This Morning. I'm your host Hajra Satti, and joining me is my wonderful co-host who happens to be Fahim Bangesh. Assalamu alaikum Fahim. How are you doing today?
Walaikum assalam. Doing very well, Hajra. And as a matter of fact, it's getting colder and colder with each passing day and getting more and more difficult to raise from your bed, out of the blanket, out of the quilts. It's getting more and more difficult, but we're managing because we need to come here with a fresh face and tell you all, because we need to exude those positive energies and tell everyone that it's a very good morning.
And I think one thing that I like about winters especially is that you can get to catch the Fajr prayers because
yes, they're pretty late.
That's true, that's true, and the sun is rising late, but then you have to catch up with the Fajr prayers, so you don't miss the chance or miss the opportunity to skip your Fajr prayers. But having said so, Fahim, we are going to talk about a topic which is very close to my heart and your heart too, also relating to the obesity, but obviously we will come back to it.
So what are you implying?
No, I'm not implying anything. It's just that this is a very hot topic.
I'm just kidding. Yes, it is very close to our hearts because it's very important in this day and age that we talk about food, nutrition, obesity, dieting, things which are on malnutrition,
undernutrition,
obviously.
Yes. But first we will take a look at our top stories, which is caretaker Prime Minister Anwarul Haque Kakar has urged the overseas Pakistanis to invest in Pakistan and assured that the government would provide all possible support and facilities to them. The Prime Minister expressed these views during a meeting with a delegation of the overseas Pakistanis, which was of course led by Nouman Kakar, that called on him in Islamabad. Prime Minister said protecting the rights of overseas Pakistanis were among the top priorities of the government. He observed that the transfer of remittances of Pakistanis residing abroad through a legal and safe manner were very important for the country's progress. The Prime Minister urged them to send their amounts through Roshan Digital Pakistan account and added that the Roshan Pakistan digital account was the safest means for the transfer of remittances and its utilization could help in improving the national economy. The Prime Minister said protection of their investments and properties were the responsibility of the government and no leniency would be tolerated in this regard, and I think that's a very timely initiative. The reassurances coming from the top tier leadership of the country, especially for the expat Pakistanis, because they are our assets and they are continuously helping us in our GDP growth, especially in the form of the remittances.
And we did a program in our show. We had a program on the rights of overseas Pakistanis, which of course is very important, and that's exactly what the government is taking initiatives on. And our next top story is about the Commerce Minister of Pakistan. Both Pakistan and Afghanistan and the Deputy Prime Minister of Uzbekistan, they co-chaired the first trilateral meeting in Islamabad, and it was aimed at strengthening the economic ties, the regional cooperation and, of course, connectivity. This meeting focused on boosting trade relations among the three nations. Discussions, they were centered around reducing trade barriers, simplifying custom procedures and promoting smoother cross-border trade. Also, the ministers explored investment prospects in various sectors, which would open up avenues for joint ventures, public-private partnerships and increased foreign direct investment. And recognizing the importance of regional connectivity, they discussed ways and means to enhance transportation networks and promoting infrastructure development to facilitate the movement of goods. Obviously, we're not just talking about bilateral cooperation here, we're talking about regional cooperation here, which has become need of the hour in the current times, obviously, because we need to improve our economic ties, we need to improve our economic situation, we need to improve where we stand, we need to grow economically, culturally, and in every way possible, we need to grow, because this is the time that in order to survive, we need to do these things, we need to take these steps.
True, true. And now let's come back to our topic, which we already discussed, which is related to the malnutrition, which is related to basically our dietary habits. And without any further ado, we would like to introduce our guest. We are very glad that we have been joined by one of our very favorite dietitian, who happens to be Dr. Nausheen Taqvi. She is also a consultant nutrition. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure having you here, Dr. Nausheen Taqvi.
Thank
Now, Dr. Nausheen, this is, like Hajra said, this is something which is really close to our hearts, right? And each and everything that you eat, they say what you eat in private shows in public, right? And considering this era where we have an extreme availability of junk food, we have availability of processed foods. What do you suggest when we talk about a healthy diet? This is a term which is used worldwide. You need to consume healthy diet. Okay, fine, we need to, but what is a healthy diet? How do you define it, being a nutritionist?
So the first thing is, yes, obesity has become like, it's spreading like
it's a pandemic, right?
It's a pandemic.
Like a disease, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. And being the third world country, but we are also facing obesity, and obesity is one of the form of malnutrition. We think malnutrition only means underweight. No, the malnutrition also includes obesity.
Okay.
Now coming to the healthy food choices, when we talk about balanced diet, when we talk about their diet, Fahim, there are two kinds of nutrients, like macronutrients and the micronutrients. What are macronutrients? Carbohydrates like chapati and bread, rice, pasta. Then we have proteins, and proteins can be both sources, like from animal sources or the plant sources. Animal sources, we have chicken, fish, mutton, beef, egg, yogurt, milk, and from the plant sources, we are talking about lentils and beans and chickpeas and all that. Having said that, we talk about the essential fats also, right? And by essential fats, I do not mean ghee or something like that, like banaspati ghee. I usually encourage vegetable source oils like corn oil, olive oil, almond oil, coconut oil, and even butter. Right, and along with that you have like certain kind of nuts in your diet. So when we talk about balanced diet, so these are the macronutrients I am talking about, and we talk about micronutrients also. The micronutrients are minerals and vitamins which contains iron, selenium, calcium and all that. Now coming to the society where we live in, when we, you know, if I tell you Fahim is coming to me and he's like, what can I eat? I was like, go have a cup of milk and go have a healthy fruit, and that is like paratha and all that. It's like, we need to see the socio-economic background also. We can't give the one kind of advice to everyone.
Okay. Very true.
Right?
Very true.
So we have to see from where the patient is coming from. If the patient is spending 10 or 15 rupees on a junk food, let's give them a good option. Like, get a certain, we give like, I'm talking about 10-15 rupees, that's the minimum a child carries to school. When we talk about malnutrition, this is what I tell the teachers also when I do the training. Give them a healthy option, like a fruit, a chapati, anything which can give them good nutrients, good calories. So this is how you approach a healthy diet.
But Nausheen, I don't know if it's with me, or I think other people can relate to it, but whenever I am hungry, the first thing that comes into my mind is maybe nuggets, some fried items.
Fast food, of course.
Yes, samosas or chips, or I mean fried items. It's not that the fruit comes into my mind. I don't know why. But
it's not just you, it's everyone.
Okay. So now I'm relaxed. So it's not just me. Okay, so unhealthy diet and lack of activity are one of the leading causes of the diseases, right? Health risks, right? So based on different age groups, what sort of activity and how much activity do you recommend, especially in the form of the mobility of the people? Because our mobility in this digital age has been restricted a lot by these machines and all these.
Because we also, to add to this, we also hear the news often on that a very young person working out in the gym had a cardiac arrest and passed away.
Yes.
So how much exercise is too much exercise in today's world?
So I generally recommend that if you want to go for a walk or exercise, 45 to 50 minutes are enough in a whole day, right?
Okay. Right.
And I do not encourage my patients, or even anybody is asking me like, we are spending 3 hours in the gym, and I was like, what are you doing in those 3 hours, right? For you are just making your muscles go into fatigue, your joints will go into fatigue. There's a certain level of activity your joints can bear with. Okay. So I generally say that go for 40 to 45, 50 minutes a day, and if you find it difficult to do it, like divide it into 2 halves, like 25 minutes in the morning, 25 minutes in the evening, something like that, which is not taking toll on your body. One thing, when I talk about kids, I can't ask kids to go for a walk or something. Always indulge them in something which is interesting for them, right? Because childhood obesity, I get to see every other day in my clinic. I can't ask that 12-year-old, 10-year-old to beta, go for a walk. So ask them what kind of physical activity are there in school. They can go for cycling, they can go for running, they can any kind of games like cricket or badminton or swimming, anything like that. again 40 to 45 minutes for kids is enough, but it should be the kind of activity which is completely dedicated to the physical activity. Then you are not doing anything else, you are just focusing on the physical activity.
Right, and one other point I think which is very close to our hearts, and we have been discussing that in our show, is related to the breastfeeding, right, and especially to the young mothers, and it fosters the healthy growth and also the cognitive development. But nowadays you will see that there are lots of formula milks and the marketing is really strong. So do you believe that it is a substitute for the breastfeeding, and do you recommend I mean the formula milk?
Because even we do see in formula milk children, they do gain a lot of weight, but that's not perhaps
the
healthy weight,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So
the best milk for exclusive first 6 months of baby's life is mother's feed, right? Mother's milk is the best milk. For that, then mother has to have a good diet. By good diet, I don't mean like big portions, but as I mentioned about certain nutrients, it should be there. Start a day with a chapati or a bread or an egg or some curry which has been made at home. Have fruits. Keep yourself well hydrated. I am talking all about mother's feed right now, because initially 6 months is baby is completely dependent on the mother, right? If the mother is deficient in any kind of thing, that is going to be passed out to the child, right? It can be iron deficiency, and iron deficiency anemia is like it's on a very higher rate in Pakistan, especially in our underprivileged areas. Then weaker bones, because the mother is deficient in vitamin D and calcium, she is supplying the same milk to the baby is not able to get the same amount of nutrients. So this is kind of a cascade cycle the child and the mother gets entrapped in. So when you're talking about healthy diet, when the mother is breastfeeding, 1500 calories are must for the mother to take in a day's time to have a good milk flow. And along with that, she needs to keep herself well hydrated. By hydration, I mean plain water, nothing else like tea, coffee, no. Avoid caffeinated drinks. Try to have something like more of a plain water. This is going to help. And along with that, 15 to 20 minutes of a walk, which can give you a good, because there's a lot of hormonal imbalance going on, and the mother faces a lot of emotional turmoil going up and down. So the walk is definitely going to help mother to feel better and feel motivated, because the sleep is not complete, her energy levels are not the same as she was before. So these are small tips which you can actually add to your daily routine and have a better
Also, I wanted to ask you, there are so many diets going on these days, Atkins diet, ketogenic diet, but one thing that I've noticed that they are A, not sustainable, B, some people say that in the treatment of some diseases they're okay, but in a longer run, don't you think they might be having any adverse effects? Because obviously, for example, ketogenic diet, you're consuming huge amounts of fat. It is not a balanced diet. So what do you suggest?
You have actually, pulled strings of my heart right now, because I am completely anti-ketogenic diet. Suppose if a patient is entering in my clinic and he or she is already obese, right? And at the same time, I'm asking my patient to have a high-fat diet. It's like telling a diabetic patient to have more sugar. So whenever a patient comes to me, being a doctor, medical doctor, I always go for lipid profile and all the tests. So before prescribing any kind of diet to my patient, they should know where they're standing. So ketogenic diet is not recommended. Ketogenic diet is a high fat diet. It has good results initially, but long term of side effects. And I remember that initially ketogenic diet came, people were going gaga about it.
Yes.
But now down the lane, like 3 to 4 years down the lane, we have actually seen the side effects: losing hair, acne, mood, depression, severe depression,
kidney disorders.
Yes, kidney disorders and all that. So I always tell my patients, do something which can become your lifestyle. Either go 5 meals a day, and 5 meals a day is not a difficult thing to do for him. We already taking 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, dinner, so we already taking. So you only need to add 2 small snacks to your diet, and the snacks are the fruits and the nuts, that's it, and a cup of green tea. So it is something which can be done. And another thing, intermittent fasting. That can be done. That's a lifestyle, and go according to the windows which are. Take a professional help. I always tell, don't go by internet knowledge or something like that. Take a professional help. Everybody has a different requirement. I have a different requirement, you have a different requirement. What if I've lost 10 kgs and you never know what kind of history I had, right? So that's not applicable on you. So I always tell, take a professional help, do not follow random advices, and these are the intermittent fasting and 5 meals a day are the way of lifestyle you can actually maintain.
And another thing, you were mentioning micronutrients in the beginning,
Yes.
right? And we see that most of the symptoms that people have these days, because
Right.
since we're not taking nutritious diet, that's because of perhaps a deficiency of micronutrients
That's
like
true.
vitamin D, B complex, zinc for that matter, calcium. Although we are having milk, but we don't know whether we are having milk or not, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So-
Purity is another question, of course, of course.
Along with the purity, I think there are certain factors. Suppose you are taking a lot of calcium, but it is not getting absorbed in the body. There might be chances that you are vitamin D deficient, because vitamin D is needed for calcium absorption.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So, you have to see if you are taking certain kind of supplement, are you taking the right kind of supplement for its absorption or not? Similarly, I tell my patients, do not take iron and calcium supplements together. If you are taking an iron supplement and you are taking with a cup of milk, so you are destroying both of them, you are wasting both of them, right?
I see.
Yes. So, because they do not let each other get absorbed, they interfere with each other's absorption in the intestine.
Oh, interesting.
So, if you are taking calcium and iron, keep a 3 hours difference between them.
Oh,
Right?
interesting.
And if you're iron deficient and you've been prescribed to take vitamin C with iron. So, vitamin C supports iron absorption. So, these are the things you can actually keep in your routine, and you can
Right.
actually do and follow that. So, this is how you can, if you are taking in diet also, or you are taking in supplements, both the things, you need to have certain vitamins for the absorption.
Right, and there's one thing that you mentioned in your conversation, and I would like to pick that up and build up the further conversation, which is about the iron deficiency,
Yes.
right? And that leads to stunting, and you talked about how it's very prevalent. It's, I think, epidemic in Pakistan,
Yes.
especially in the underprivileged or marginalized areas. So why do you think, number one, there is this deficiency, and how can we overcome that, considering the fact that their socioeconomic background is not that strong, right? So how can we help those people?
So, Hajra, when we talk, since I am a public health specialist also, and I have been working on some, different projects, and recently I went to Quetta and Chaghi for the training, so on malnutrition, and there we were talking about stunting and wasting, right? Because that's a big kind of challenge we are facing, as we are facing diabetes, at the same time we are facing stunting and wasting. So, yes, then if here it is needed that you need to give a training or a kind of advice to the parents, or then let them know that what are the kinds of the diets they can have. You can give them different options also, because if a child is deficient in iron, then a green leafy vegetables or apple or certain kind of things, you only need to tell them. So, this is how you approach. It's like a family societal approach. You train the parents, you tell them, create awareness, then that's how you are targeting stunting and wasting. Now, where the patients are severely stunted and wasted, they are always recommended to seek help from the hospitals, because there are centers where completely dealing with stunting and wasting.
Also, Dr. Saiba, we know that yesterday World Diabetes Day was observed, right? I have a question about diabetics. You mentioned intermittent fasting. We know that many of the diabetics who are on insulin, they tend to gain a lot of weight, right?
Yes.
So, is intermittent fasting okay for them to lose weight, or what is the right manner for them to eat? What is the right way of monitoring their dietary habits?
Generally I do not recommend intermittent fasting, because there is a long fasting window, and when they eat there is a huge insulin spike. We have to control the insulin spike. For patients who are diabetic and are planning to lose weight, I would recommend go for 5 meals a day, small 5 meals like breakfast, a controlled good portion, then a lunch, and then the dinner, and have early dinner. Why am I recommending 5 meals a day? Because we do not want huge spikes in insulin. Suppose if I've been fasting and I'm diabetic, I've been fasting for 16 hours, and after 16 hours I have something, so definitely I'm going to have insulin. The more the spike of insulin, the more sugar is going to release in the body. So, to control that, it's more like a balanced ECG going on, right?
Right,
So,
right.
you avoid huge spikes. You want the insulin spike to be equal all the time. So, this is how we are going to control the blood sugar level.
What is the ideal blood sugar level in a diabetic patient and in a non-diabetic patient?
So, now the values have actually, initially there used to be like
They've
fasted.
evolved?
Yes, initially it was 110, now we encourage between 90 to 100 fasting,
I
milligrams
see.
per deciliter. And for random, it used to be 180, but now we generally encourage it should be between 150 to 160 milligrams per deciliter.
And this is for non-diabetic.
This is for non-diabetic and diabetic both.
I see.
Ideal if you try planning to control your sugar levels for diabetic also and for non-diabetic. So these are the ideal levels, your blood sugar levels should stay in between them.
Right, and Dr. Nausheen, we've seen in Pakistan is suffering from the malnutrition, and you talked about, so malnutrition is not just being about the underweight, overweight and obesity is also a problem.
That's actually a very pertinent point that she raised.
That's very true. So how can we deal with this pandemic of obesity, because lots of people think, and this is the general perception, and as a layperson, if you can correct me out, the first thing that comes into mind if you see an obese person is that it's because that he eats a lot or he or she eats a lot, right? So do you think that this is the only
Mashallah,
reason?
bada sehatmand hai.
Yes, khate pite gharane ka hai, and all of these
Until
labels.
only the child is very guplu, you know, he's not a healthy looking child.
Yeah, it's not cute
It's
child.
exactly,
That's
exactly.
very,
so that's the major
yes.
cause of childhood obesity. Then as Fahim mentioned, that we generally want to see a very you know, a healthy baby, so we start top feed with the child instead of the mother feed. And I believe that for here the training starts from the mother and the person who is taking care of the kitchen, right? And you need to, as you mentioned, nuggets. I will never say don't eat nuggets. Have homemade nuggets. They are not as difficult to make.
Right.
You know, there are multiple ways by which you can make homemade things and avoid processed food from outside, and this is one of the major cause that is leading to obesity. Then the instant food delivery availability, you know, we all are facing. I have grown up kids, you know, if I'm not home, they have their mobile, they have access, you know, they have then maa ka dil hai, so you know, you can't say no to them. So this happens. So basically you need to go for healthy options, and I'm so glad to tell you that now especially in Pakistan, people have actually become very aware of the healthy options, the organic markets, and you know, having organic things. So this is how we can deal with childhood obesity, because we can't, you know, as a small 6-year, 8-year child who's obese, you can't pull the food away from them. They want to eat. So that's
the growing age.
Yes. Then you can't, and you can't have burger. Like as a mother, I'm having burger and I'm asking my child to have a grilled food. So it starts from me.
Right.
I need to change my diet, so my child is observing me, and he or she is going to have the same diet.
Because the kids have this tendency to imitate their parents, right? And that is why it is important that we have a very healthy sort of a characteristics in our personality, so that our kids follow that pattern.
Because we become the role models for the children that we have, the offspring that we have. Dr. Saiba, thank you very much for coming in here and giving us your time and sharing such valuable information, which was knowledgeable, not just for us, I'm sure for our viewers as well. Thank you very much for coming in here.
Pleasure.
Absolute pleasure it was. Now we're going to move on to our second segment, but before that we need to take a short break. Stay tuned to PTV World.
Welcome back, and we were having a very interesting discussion on health and diets and how we need to keep ourselves healthy. But when we talk about health, so health is not just us, because we are living in a very integrated and a natural system, and if the nature, the mother earth is not well, we can feel that, but sometimes we are not able to voice that, right? And how much human contribution is there in producing such sort of environment where we are feeling the effects of the climate change, and our human activity has degenerated the environment. This is a hot topic that we are going to talk about, because COP conference is also coming up, and Pakistan is one of the most vulnerable country which is facing the effects of the climate change, although it is of not our own I would say fault, because we are facing that, but obviously we are going to talk more about it and develop this conversation further. We are very glad that we have been joined by someone who is very young, but she's very passionately talking about it, and that is also coming from a very personal tone, because as
Yes.
Pakistanis, we have all felt the effects, the adverse effects of the climate change. So we're very glad that we have been joined by a young climate change activist who happens to be Zainab Waheed. Assalamu alaikum, Zainab, and welcome to our show.
Walaikum assalam, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me.
It's so good to see a young person talking about climate change in Pakistan. Obviously, this is, like Hajra said, a hot topic these days. Because we see that the lungs of the world are being cut away. We
Yes.
see that the ecosystem is getting disturbed. I was
that's
watching a documentary on Netflix, and that was showing how we as humans have disrupted and destroyed our own world, our own home.
Yes.
How do you feel about it? And so far, and when did you feel that you had to do something about the climate, and you started feeling that this was something that I have to do in my life?
I think I was very young when I started seeing this climate impact. My family comes from a village in northern Pakistan where communities rely on mountain streams called katte, and so those kattes were the source of life, basically, where power from those waters would generate electricity for the whole village, and we would get our wheat ground down from the machines that were generated. And so when climate change changed rainfall patterns, the water in the kattas dried down, and so I saw the first-hand human cost of climate change. That's how at the age of 13 I realized that this is a real problem, and if this is the impact on a small community in a small part of Pakistan, this is only going to amplify for all global southern countries. And so for the last 4 years I have been a climate activist and also a journalist, bringing conversations to the grassroots of Pakistan that aren't there already, but I'm trying to spark some interest in this. I'm trying to gather up momentum, especially in the youth, for climate activism.
And wake them from their slumber.
So this is usually something I think about a lot, whether it is a slumber or is it an ignorance, or is it just that we aren't introduced to this idea very much. So even though us Pakistanis, we go through these impacts every year, we go through the floods, we go through smogs, we go through heat waves, we aren't really able to identify what it is that's causing all of this. So we generally tend to think think of it in terms of Azab, for example. We saw this ideology going around last year when the floods happened, catastrophic floods. We aren't really able to identify the root cause of it, which is climate change. And I think we can trace it back to the lack of climate awareness in our educational systems. So if we start including that in our curriculums across all junior schools, senior schools, as well as the higher education, I think this consciousness of climate change can be built up in our
But that requires
society.
a collective effort collective effort by our humanity, because it's not just the problem of Pakistan, and I think the Western countries needs to take the
Definitely.
initiative, because this
slowly
is
and
their,
gradually, like
Yeah, of
Hajra,
course.
you're very right. We're seeing the effects in the West as well, the global north.
Yes.
the global north, it's across the world. But Zainab, since you talked about very passionately how local communities are getting affected and their livelihood is getting disrupted because of that, and you belong to one of those communities, let's talk about the concept of climate justice, and let's talk about the loss and damage fund, the reparations that we need to get. People are talking about, people used to talk about it, but now since the news cycles have moved on 24/7, we've seen that the momentum that was built on has gradually eroded, right?
Yes.
But now COP conference is coming again.
Yes.
So, and tell us about your activism on the grassroots level, especially you talked about how you are making awareness among the madrasa girls, right? Why particularly madrasa girls?
Madrasa girls, because as I talked about the gaps in formal educational systems as well. So imagine if that is the level of lack of climate awareness in formal education, what would be the level of ignorance in informal education systems? So that is a gap I try to address in my own activism. It's on a very small capacity, on a very small level, where I reach out to madrasa girls and I try to teach them. And that is because these girls come from the most socio-economically vulnerable communities in Pakistan, which are first and foremost affected by climate change and have the least capacity to deal with its consequences. And so I try to fill that gap by teaching these girls about climate change. And you talked about climate justice, right? And so I try to address that. So basically, climate justice is the thing that you mentioned about the responsibility of the West. We as Pakistanis, we have less than 1% contributions to global
emissions, yes.
carbon emissions. However, 70% of these carbon emissions come from fossil fuels industries, which are primarily located in the global north and also subsidized by and facilitated by global northern countries, which are rich and developed. And most of these emissions also come from these rich countries.
Right,
and
right.
so if emissions, so the responsibility for climate change is primarily in the global north, but all of the catastrophes that climate change brings about are in the global south. That is an imbalance.
True.
It is not just an environmental issue, climate change.
It's
It
an
is a social
asymmetrical, yes.
injustice issue, which
Right.
exacerbates already existing inequalities, especially gender-based inequalities. It exacerbates gender-based violence. It exacerbates food insecurity. So I think the need is dire for us to not see it as just a far off environmental issue and connected to scientific books and reports and speeches, but also understand the real first-hand impacts on people on ground who have done nothing to cause climate change,
That's
but are
true.
suffering from its worst impacts.
And there is a tinge and element of racism also in this entire conversation of the climate justice. Thank you for highlighting that, because people who are dominating the global north, especially the white class that is sitting there, since they are not getting as affected as the
Yeah.
people who are sitting in the global south, and again that the old conception, the binaries of Orient versus the Occident comes into the play. So how much do you think we can address this issue if we add the conversation of racism into this entire conversation, because it is a very pertinent issue in the
Yes.
West and lots of people are talking about it.
Yes. So when we talk about races, for example, communities, different marginalized communities, which is not only racial communities but also gender minorities. So women and communities who are located primarily in Africa, Asian communities, indigenous people, not only in Pakistan but across the world.
the world.
They're disproportionately impacted by climate change, not only because they already are located in areas geographically more vulnerable to climate change, but also historical
Baggage
behaviors
there,
to
yes.
them and their economic instabilities, which stem from history and spread over centuries, also make them incapable of dealing with the consequences.
Right.
I think that is a very pertinent issue. And so then when we talk about climate solutions, we also need to focus on the specific needs of these marginalized communities, indigenous communities, women, and all of these racial minorities as well.
So we do see, Zainab, that these things are talked
Right.
about, especially on platforms like the UN, especially on platforms like the COP27. Now we know that 28 would be held. So what future course of action do you have in mind, for example, say the next 5 years? Where do
Yeah.
you see yourself? What do you see yourself doing? Because already you have achieved a lot. You have spoken at different fora already, also the international fora. So what do you where do you see yourself basically doing in the next 5 years? Which countries do you expect yourself to go to and talk
Yeah.
about this and sensitize more and more people regarding climate
Right.
justice, regarding climate change issue? Because there are still people in the world who still say that climate change is a hoax.
There is definitely a lot of climate denial, and I usually talk about this, that the fossil fuels industries and climate criminals vomit out billions of dollars every year into climate denial propaganda, and we see evidence of that everywhere. This climate denial propaganda comes in the form of absolute outright denial, so climate change is a hoax is one example of that. It also comes in the form of greenwashing, so we see celebrities starting new brands and making their advertisements more climate friendly or conscious of climate change, but they're not really. They say, oh, we donate 2% of our profits towards organizations that are working for climate justice, but when you check those organizations out, they're not really absolutely not connected to climate justice at all. And so we see green leaves on bottles and on cars and different places, and we see those on styrofoam cups that talk about how green friendly they are,
Yeah.
but they're not really. So all of this is climate denial. And so you talked about how I see myself in
Yeah.
the next 5 years. There are two tiers of that. One is the future I would like to see. I would like to see myself in an ideal world where climate change has been solved, not in the next 5 years, say next 20 years, in an ideal world, climate change has been solved. We're phasing down our emissions. We're phasing out fossil fuels industries, and I get all the time to focus on my education, my career. I get to build a life. But in the future, I can realistically I see myself still marching on streets. I still see myself holding up placards and shouting in megaphones and calling on to the people who have the authority to stop climate change, but they're still not listening to us.
We do have certain example of about what you're talking about in the form of the Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
Because, she is a name which resonates with the climate activism, but then there is another school of thought which talks about how climate justice is propagating the climate vandalism. So for example, the climate activists, they are destroying the paintings, and that's a very extreme form of the activism, right? But obviously the proponents and the supporters says that it's important in order to make sure that our attention is not diverted away, right? But then again, obviously what sort of activism will form, we would see in the coming days. But thank you so much, Zainab, for putting our conversation again back on the track. We see in the last COP conference too that there was lots of conversation, but we need to walk the talk, and
this momentum needs to increase with each passing day, and we don't need to let the momentum die down. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining in. Thank you very much, Zainab, for coming in here and speaking beautifully about climate change.
Right, and with that we will wrap up our segment. Until next time, it's Allah Hafiz and goodbye.